Well, we asked the Education Secretary and Schools Minister to come on the programme. Neither were available, nor were any Conservative members of the Education Select Committee. But with me in the studio is Jo Yurky, a parent and co-founder of the Fair Funding for All Schools campaign, and Jules White, the head teacher of a school in West Sussex. And in Leeds is David O'Hara, who you saw in that report. He's the chair of governors at Penistone Grammar in Barnsley. Jules White, what is the situation for your school at the minute?
It's really very bad. Last year I had to find £250,000 saving. This coming year it's £350,000, and there's only one real way to do that, and that's actually losing teaching staff. I lost 3 last year. We didn't replace 5 members of administrative support, and I'm having to make further cuts in even things like cleaning, premises staff, my IT provision, and matters are just getting worse and worse. I'm even having to look at the moment about making cuts to vital counselling services for some of our most vulnerable pupils.
Now, West Sussex was one of the areas that lobbied for this fair funding formula, and theoretically you're a winner, aren't you? What is there still to complain about?
That was meant to be the case in theory. The funding formula itself has been delayed for over a year. We were told by the DfE to wait and matters will get better, but superficially that happens, but the reality is quite different. So, for example, in my school, we'll go up by around about 3%, which is £180,000. It's not enough, but it would be better. But at the same time, we're receiving huge unfunded cuts of around about 8 to 10%. They amount to £200,000. So I didn't think my school could get any worse off, but actually in 2018 it will do.
Jo Yurky, 10 of the highest funded areas in the country are all in London. And if an area, where your school is, say, gets 6,000 a pupil roughly, and Jules' school gets just over 4,000. Isn't it fair that there should be this redistribution of cash?
Well, we support the principle of a new national funding formula. We agree that historical injustice in the funding of our schools needs to be addressed. Our concern is that what's proposed doesn't amount to justice for anyone. And that's because it's based on a redistribution of a pot of money that we already know isn't big enough to sustain our schools adequately. And I think that even those that lobbied for the formula did so on the basis that they were underfunded, not on the basis that other schools were overfunded. And I think it's really a lie to put across the idea that there are any rich schools in the context of real terms cuts, the largest that we've seen for 30 years. If that were true, then why in the area of London, for example, that I live, is there a school asking parents to contribute towards its £100,000 deficit that it's got? Why is there a school down the road from where I live that had to lose a teaching post, lose a teaching assistant post, reduce its special educational needs by 40%, cut its music club and cut its science club?
David O'Hara, you said in the piece there's a north-south divide. Barnsley is desperately in need of more money, and in essence, if that had to come from other schools in London, that was right.
Well, I think I would agree with sort of Joel and Jo that there are 2 issues really here. The first is the size of the cake, and everyone in education would love to have a bigger cake. You talked about 6 or 8% increase, a 6% increase over the next few years. We'd love a bigger cake. Will we get that from the Chancellor next week? I very much doubt it. So we're going to have to deal with a cake that's massively unfairly split. And so if you look at my school, for example, should have an additional £700,000. The average loss in London is under £10,000 from the funding formula. So I think, yeah, the burning injustice is just huge, and we're in this together. And I think London may just have to give a little bit more than it's currently doing.
Jo Yurky first on that.
Well, I think the government would very much like to set school communities against each other because, of course, what they want to do is not to fund the promise that they made. Now, the promise that they made to parents was to introduce this new funding formula. One would have thought that they would have had to cost that and to provide the funds to level schools up. I don't think anybody lobbied on the basis of dragging schools down. It was about bringing schools funding up.
But David O'Hara does make a good point that the government have suggested there is no greater cake and there has to be some way of slicing it up.
Well, I don't think we should be that pessimistic. We need to make sure all of our schools are funded absolutely adequately. One of the problems is that the DfE doesn't know actually how much we need to do that. They need to do much more work on that. They need to accept that it's no good introducing a new funding formula that doesn't take into account huge unfunded costs. And actually, there is money around if the political will was there. We saw a year ago, if you wanted to become an academy, you're going to be forced to become an academy. £500 million, £500 million was made available. Within seconds of the grammar school announcement coming out, the Chancellor found £150 million. Free schools has been an absolute disaster in terms of efficiency.
The reality is, though, David O'Hara would say that the South has a much bigger slice of the pie that's available than the North, and that needs redistributing.
Well, that's not the case, obviously, in West Sussex, in Cornwall, in Dorset. Everyone knows those figures. My school is one of the lowest funded across England. But what we've actually got to do is address the problem that schools are the lifeblood, and the children that we serve are the lifeblood of our communities. If we want to make sure that we've got really high levels of skills, then we have to invest properly. Nobody wants a settlement that is unrealistic, but we must have a fair one, and one that's manageable.
David O'Hara.
But I think I agree about more money, and it will be fantastic, and I'm sure schools in the South and London have a big issue. But when Justine Greening launched the consultation, she said that a child in Hackney could get 50% more than a child in Barnsley with the same background and so on. That will be 40% difference in 3 years' time. So we're getting nowhere close to a fair funding formula. We have to give schools like mine in Barnsley a much bigger amount faster. And I know it's hard, but if we don't get 3 or 4 billion from the government next week, which we won't do, we're just going to have to share things out between us more fairly.
But David,
isn't that the realistic picture?
No, I don't think so, because our parent campaign is bringing together parents from the worst funded areas and the so-called best funded areas. So I think what we're saying is that parents expect the government to deliver on the promises they made to us.
But I mean, we've watched in the programme earlier on, we have, really serious problems within the police, within the NHS. Look, you're looking for a bigger share of funding. Where does it come from? If it comes for schools, where do you take it out of?
The point is actually 3 billion is being taken out of education. We just want the size of the cake to remain adequate. David's absolutely right. The point of the National Fair Funding was to provide better stability, greater transparency, and to reduce the gaps. At the moment, what the National Funding Formula does is it actually tries to take away from schools in perhaps London and other metropolitan areas which are actually adequately funded, whilst at the same time it doesn't even give the low-funded schools, whether in Barnsley or West Sussex, enough money. And the government really do need to rethink this, and they have got a way of doing it, but they actually want to pursue projects that aren't viable.
Well, I think the question should be, can we really afford not to invest in our schools? Because no funds, no future. It's as simple as that. We're going to be leaving the European Union. We need to make sure that we have children or people that have the skills that we're going to need to grow our economy for ourselves. If we don't invest in our schools, we won't have that.
Really sorry, we're going to have to end it there. I would like to come back to you, David. I'm sorry we couldn't. Thank you so much, all of you. Thanks a lot. John.